Tell me about the God you don't believe in, and other conversation starters from a church planter in Silicon Valley. The interview with Nicole Lamarche is coming up, but first, one message. Looking for a small group curriculum for your church that really works? Living Compass is brand new, and it offers a way to bring real transformation into your congregation. Living Compass focuses on wholeness and wellness, and you can check them out at livingcompass.org. Okay, here's your program. Hi everybody, I'm Chris Y'all. Welcome to ChurchNext. This is a place where dynamic and innovative ministry leaders come to tell the stories, the success stories behind their work so that others can learn from their experiences. Silicon Valley, one of the most intellectually and scientifically vibrant places in the world, a place that attracts some of the world's most brilliant people who come to invent and to hone the technologies that change the world. But with all that brain power, is there room for God? My next guest thinks so. She's an incredibly gifted young pastor named Nicole Lamarche, whose talents range from a Miss California crown years ago to a rigorous academic and now pastoral career as she's embarked upon a journey to share Christianity in her context, the United Church of Christ tradition. And Nicole, welcome to Church Next. And let's start right there. You are reaching out to the spiritual but not religious, I saw on your website. And what do you mean by that?
Well, as you know, Chris, that term encompasses a wide range of perspectives and inclinations, but I think it's shorthand for saying that religious institutions have lost their way and have focused on the wrong things. I hear that all the time. People associate Christianity, particularly in this country, with judgment, hypocrisy, and an obsession with sex. Like, what is it about that? So in that wide tent of spiritual but not religious, I'm working to gather those who identify spiritual, who want to live deep lives with those who have shared values. And I hear again and again that people are drawn to the teachings of Jesus, particularly caring for the poor and radical generosity, even if they're pissed off at the institutional church.
Sure. So in your present context, Nicole, are you planting a church?
Yes, from scratch.
Oh, great. Tell me how that's gone. What kind of process have you gone through?
Well, I tend to be more cautious about these kinds of things. I grew up in the church, so that's my framework. I grew up in a small United Church of Christ congregation and then served two established congregations before embarking on this endeavor. And so it took me about 2 years to raise money. I felt comfortable. That's one of the biggest mistakes church planters make, is not anticipating the cost of making this happen, particularly in Northern California, which is a very expensive area. So I spent 2 years raising money, and just this past spring, I've gotten to the work of attempting to turn proximity into community. But it's really hard. It's really hard. People have been really burned by the church, and so my work is often, it feels like I often begin with apology of some kind, and attempting to meet people where they are and hear their stories. And I know I'm not alone. The best conversation starter is, tell me about the God you don't believe in. And so it's a wonderful place to start, and on we go from there. People often say all kinds of things, but what you would guess. I don't believe in the man in the clouds. I don't believe God, causes earthquakes and hurricanes. And so it's really sort of in the trenches, meeting people where they are and hearing their stories.
And so, is there traction then around forming a community, of folk who are willing to live with the questions?
Well, right now, this is a long process. Right now, I'm building the launch team. And so this is the group that will be helping me start the congregation. And from everything I've read, this group often does not end up being a part of the congregation. In other words, God sends you folks for this particular task. Yeah. And so right now I am building that team in the hope of launching preview services this summer, and with the plan to launch fully in January of 2014.
You mentioned launching preview services. What do you mean by that, and what are those going to look like, at least as you can predict now?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about this project is that it's really hard to find progressive resources. So a lot of my work is involved translating, because, as you know, folks in more conservative theological traditions are way ahead in terms of this kind of work. So the resources that I use are folks with a really different orientation and a really different motivation. But the idea behind a preview service is that you give folks a taste of the genre and style, and with the hope of sort of gathering the spirit and the momentum, so people kind of get to see what it will look like. And worship is one of the last things you do, because you don't want folks to show up and have there be 5 or 10 people there. So that's why it's sort of a long process, in that you gather the core group and grow the core group through gathering a fellowship service and that kind of stuff. So the preview service is just like a taste and see, to build folks' anticipation for the launch, the full launch.
And so what does this look like then, Nichole? Is this like kind of a Bible study, or kind of a a coffee nosh or something?
You mean the worship, or
your these preview services?
Yeah, so I'm not there yet. So a lot of this is I don't know, and as I said, like, I really feel as if I'm a pioneer in all the hardest and best things about that. So a lot of this is like just building the plane in the air and figuring it out and making mistakes and trying over or trying again. But my sense of where things will be in terms of the worship is that it will be a blended style. A lot of folks said, well, does that mean, you're never going to sing hymns, or, a real defensive posture about wanting to make sure that what I'm doing includes tradition. And, the organ is a good sort of image for that, because if you think about the organ, it's one of those instruments that is never heard anywhere else.
Right.
I mean, it might be a concert, an organ concert or something like that
nobody goes to.
Right. So I want to meet people where they are. So my image of the worship will be media rich. So when we're praying for Syria, we're engaged with images of Syria. And when we're singing about Spirit, we might use U2 or the Beatles or Indigo Girls or Mumford and Sons or all the above, mixed in with, the hymns of our faith, using instruments that people are used to hearing in everyday life.
Right.
So much of this work is meeting people where they are, and all the ways that you can imagine, that includes. And
I don't mean to denigrate the organ, but I because I'm guessing that there are probably instances in which that would be very enriching and nurturing to your folk, blended in with everything else.
Yes, yeah, no, I'm not against the organ. Again, I'm such a church person. I grew up with it, but if you think about introducing our faith to folks who either haven't been in ages because they had a bad experience, or have never been a part of any kind of faith community, it's one of those things that, the organ is just an example of something that is so foreign. So it's not a place to start, in other words.
Now, I would imagine that this job of planning is deeply spiritual work, in that you're really trusting in the God who has called you as a minister to lay the foundations. How has your spirituality been affected, and in what ways do you call upon prayer and guidance in what you're doing?
It's such a good question, and even though I feel like I've been doing this for a while, I don't have community yet in that way, but I'm still getting inquiries from folks about how to do this. And one of the very first things that I say is you must be called to it. You must have a confirmation from God that you are called to this, because it is too hard otherwise. I did have an experience where I literally felt I was like waiting on God, and I literally got a phone call. I had been praying about it for a while, and I got a phone call from a colleague who said, I know you've been praying about starting a new congregation, and I want to offer a $10,000 seed to get it going. And I'm like, okay, that's confirmation. I've been praying forever. But it is such an experience of growing in faith, because I am used to serving, as I said, in established settings, and this is all very entrepreneurial. I'm used to working with structure and, lots of goals and to-dos, and I have those things, but it's sort of like wide open. And so without the trust and faith that God has put a call on my heart and wants to use me in particular for this project, there's simply no way that a person can be sustained in this kind of ministry without that sense of deep faith. But my sort of experience of God in the everyday is just, I'm one of those people that totally prays without ceasing, in the sense that, like, I literally will, in the middle of the farmer's market, raise my hands and say, "Thank you, God," or hold my baby and, just squeeze her and just say, "My heart is full, oh Lord, be with me in this moment." I feel like I am wrapped in the Spirit and all that I do in that way. And my spiritual practice is really in reading and prayer and walking the dogs. And I'm not one of those people who sets aside time to sit in silence for any real length of time, in part because my life doesn't really allow for that. We have 2 cats, 2 dogs, and a toddler, and 2 busy working adults. But I do, I bring God into the busyness rather than trying to set the busyness aside.
Yeah. And I'm interested more in the brass tacks of how you're going about this. I mean, certainly we've heard other church planters, famous stories about going door to door, passing out cards, doing demographic research. How do you, I mean, are you from this community? Do you already have a lot of contacts, or is this just a place you feel God's called you to?
It's a really good question, because I, am doing kind of the hardest way to do it. It's sort of like a modified parachute drop. I spent 5 years in Northern California, but further north in Berkeley and San Francisco, and San Jose is a whole new territory for me. When I felt called to it, I knew it would have to be somewhere on the West Coast. At that time, I was on Cape Cod serving a small congregation, and so I knew it wouldn't be there, because one of the very first things is that you have to match the people that you're trying to draw. But I'm not from San Jose, and my family's from Southern California, so I'm California-ish. But there is a particular ethos in San Jose. The way that I picked this particular spot is that I prayed, and I met with a demographer and did lots of census research in terms of where people are living. And so I discovered that San Jose, the city of San Jose, the median age is 34. And Santa Clara County is 36, so that's a little bit wider in terms of the geography of what we know is Silicon Valley. And I scoured the map for faith communities that were what I might say unapologetically progressive, but also had vital worship and what I might say unboring kinds of ways of being together. And unless I'm missing something, I haven't been able to find that. And I have attended a lot of wonderful evangelical congregations, and I'm sort of operating under a hunch that there are folks who are compromising on theology for a wonderful worship experience that feels relevant and alive. And so that's why this particular area of San Jose, the reason I say modified parachute drop is because I have approached a congregation where I served as a field ed student 10 years ago, the Congregational Church of San Mateo, which is a healthy, vital, progressive United Church of Christ congregation on the peninsula. And they voted last year to call me to do this ministry and to support me and to serve as the mother church. So I say modified, even though it's basically a parachute. It's kind of the hardest way to do this.
Okay, so you do have kind of a parent church that's kind of overseeing and offering you the support that I would imagine that's vital in this work.
So far they have offered me tons of prayer, and I've raised all the money myself, but I'm hoping at some point that the congregations who are healthy and strong in this conference, will feel called to support what I'm doing. But so far they've offered lots of prayer and lots of love. But typically in a full mother church scenario, they would offer you money and people. And so far, I haven't asked for that or been given that, but I know that, what I'm doing cannot, thrive unless I have some strong church folks for the launch team. So I'm going to be in conversation with them about, lending me some folks for the launch team, because that's really the healthy model of, sending strong, sort of lending some pillars. A healthy congregation can do that to support a new life.
Sure. So how are you going about, Nichole, finding people who are interested in doing what you're doing? Are you feeling a sense of mission in that, it's to build a vibrant community, it's to reach the poor, it's to, help unwed mothers? I mean, is there any kind of definition of what you're seeing as the mission you're called to do?
Well, there's so much I could say about that, but the short version is that I feel called to create a community that is more like a school for love. To me, Jesus' call was so much about love, about creating opportunities for us to grow in love of ourselves, our God, and our neighbor. And it feels like we've gotten off track when we veer far from that. And so when I dream big, I imagine that this community will be sort of a hub for all kinds of things that are happening in the community, and maybe even some folks live there, live on site somehow, that there's intentional community, that there are nonprofits doing good work that's sort of operated out of this hub, based in this hub. It's so much to me about love and inviting people and creating spaces where people can live deep, profound lives. Even though there are lots of folks who are just totally, turned off by Christianity and religion in general, people have shared and been honest about the fact that they're hungry for live community. I mean, Facebook is great, but it cannot replace in-person community where you can join with others of shared values. And particularly here, one of the marks of folks who live here is that most folks are from somewhere else. So there's even more a need for community and ways to, feel supported, and all the things you can imagine that go with that.
How are you using the digital world, as a resource for what you're doing?
Well, I'm still learning, how to do this. One of just a quick way to illustrate that is that I try to blog on a weekly basis, and I'm not a blogger. If you're a blogger, everything says you've got to blog every day and this and that. But my focus is to wade into the sea of ideas and to frame what's happening, whatever the conversation may be, politics, religion, any cultural stuff, to wade into that sphere and to frame it with a moral frame, a Christian frame, a spiritual frame. And I've found it's a really wonderful way to draw people to my website. That's sort of my focus, is to wade into the sphere of ideas and to draw people into the conversation, and get them to the website. And I'm learning all kinds of things about how to do that. And it turns out that, it matters which day of the week that I put it out, which time of the day. And I've learned that folks, when you do that, you can track how long people stay on your website and all that kind of stuff. And it's less than 2 minutes. It's generally 90 seconds. So even if they read what I'm writing and then go from there to check out the website, they're not there for very long. So it confirms everything I've read about you got to quickly communicate what you're about, have sort of a clean, easy to navigate, kind of simple layout. But I'm still learning. I'm not an expert, and I don't pretend to be. Right.
I mean, I'm wondering you meet people in the course of your daily life. You get referred to people. How do the introductions work? How do they discover you?
Yeah. So an example, tomorrow I'm attending a Rainbow Chamber event, which is a gathering of businesses and nonprofits that are, allies and support gay and lesbian folks. And so that's just like a business networking event. So I'll just show up and, like any other entrepreneur, share my vision, share who I am. And it's all about relationships. I mean, when folks realize that I'm not I'm not crazy. Well, I mean, I have to be a little bit crazy to be starting a church from scratch, but But I have a vision for a community, and I love to talk about that, and people love to hear about it. So it's just like any other business in a way of being able, sharing the vision. Any chance I get, I wear T-shirts that say all kinds of things to get people to talk to me. I have one that says "The Christian Left," one that says, "God bless everyone, no exceptions." One that says, God is not a boy's name. Any way that I can get people to talk to me that's sort of like accessible and, disarming in a way, I use any opportunity I find.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that one of the lines that you use is, "Tell me about the God you don't believe in." Mm-hmm. I'm curious about the spiritual temperament in the context where you're planning a church and where you're ministering. Is there kind of a burnout that you have to address, a kind of an anger or even an apathy?
Yes, particularly the anger piece. Mm-hmm. And that, obviously that depends on someone's experience and context. But I often, and I know other clergy feel this too, this is not just in my ministry, where we're often the recipients of people's lifetime of baggage about God. And but I think that's one of those invitations for us as clergy to take good care of ourselves and to be able to not take that stuff on, not take it into ourselves, because that can be toxic. Especially if I'm, all committed to, being a disciple of Jesus and, creating communities of love. I really want to guard against that. But also, I think often the way people heal is to be able to tell their story and to be heard. So I hold those things together, that I want to create space for people to unload their anger and unload their anxiety and fear, but also not taking it on myself. But I think that's as I said, I think that's a call that, most clergy share.
Yeah. A lot of the folks who subscribe to ChurchNext and who are me watching this are folks who are already in congregations. They're in established places. You've served 2 calls before coming here and turning into this entrepreneur. I'm wondering what you've learned in your experience so far that you say, gosh, if I was in an established parish, I would certainly now do this or do this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh man, there's so much I could say. One of the things I notice in terms of, and again, this is my opinion, so I'm not the gospel, but one of the key differences between congregations that are healthy and growing and congregations that are either stasis or in decline is when they, the time when they stop looking out. To me, that is like the turning point, either for growth or for death, is when the focus becomes caring about themselves, and, keeping the herd together rather than, seeking out those who are not yet a part of the community. And to me, that's like, in a way, very simple, but really hard, because it means knowing your neighborhood. It means knowing who you are. It means, welcoming the stranger, all kinds of things. But that's like a really simple difference between death and life is, are you focused on yourselves, or are you focused on, the world? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't take care of ourselves, but a lot of congregations, like, that's what they're about. And they use the family metaphor, and, we're all in this together, and woe to the person who shows up and feels like there's already a conversation going on that they're not a part of. That's one of the things I might say. The other thing, in terms of established, the difference between established and what I'm doing is, I think in some ways, just about purpose. And I think, we have all these programs and, tons of books on, doing your vision and mission and so much about that. But, I often say to folks, in one sentence, why do you exist? What's the point of your existence? And a lot of congregations really struggle to answer that. And I think it's really important to know what difference do you make on earth? What are you about? And, those are really simple ways to start conversation. And I think that's a place where when you're starting something new, you have to know right away what you're about, and you have to be able to say it quickly and, effectively. And I think it's easy to sort of get lulled into the comfort of just, we're here as a we're a family. And, again, I think that metaphor does not serve us well in terms of growing.
Right. Yeah, we go through strategic plans and we go through visioning and we try to continually keep that vibrant. But yeah, it is. I would imagine it is easier for you to have to be rather firm on that because that's all you got. I mean, you got to share. Right. You got to share. So advice you might give to those of us, I'm a pastors, who are in established congregations, is this kind of continual process of trying not to focus inwardly. That's human nature. The average church in the U.S. lasts one generation. We get wrapped up in ourselves. But what are some of the strategies that you might engage to help us continue to look out and to help us continue to be drawn to our purpose?
Well, these are really, again, there's a wide range of things I could say about this, but just in terms of practical things, I've been doing a lot of pulpit supply since I don't have a regular Sunday gig, and it just amazes me how a lot of our congregations have yet to transition from the assumption that everyone knows how church goes. Everything from language that is foreign, like narthex, or whatever doxology, whatever words that are our language. I think any way that you can make what you're doing accessible to people who have no idea what church is, that is powerful. You want someone to be able to walk in and not feel like they're already excluded because they don't know the language that people are speaking. And that translates from everything. I've walked in and there's a mob of folks visiting, literally blocking the doorway. Now that's awesome that folks really want to greet each other and see each other. But again, if your purpose is looking out to welcome the stranger, so much of how we are together sort of needs to be not questioned, but at least examined if the focus is growth. Simple things like printing the Lord's Prayer, just any way that we can, remove assumptions that people are supposed to know about what it means to be church together. I think those are all ways to extend hospitality, and then any way that you can bring who you are outside of the building. A lot of folks just at this point won't even enter a church. So how are you bringing your ministry beyond the walls? And there are all kinds of ways, to do that. A simple thing would be for you to have office hours somewhere in the community, a coffee shop, a restaurant, some way for people to encounter you, outside of the walls of the church. And that could be farmers markets, that could be any way for people to just sort of see who you are, without having to come to building. All ways that an established congregation can bring the vision to where people are. I mean, so much of our work and growth in established congregations is drawing people to the building, figuring out creative ways to draw them to where we are. And I think in a way that should be flipped. How do you bring what you're doing to where people already are? Because that tends to be a more effective way of getting to them.
Right. So how would let me paint a hypothetical. So what if you you were transported into kind of an established church in the area where you are now? What sort of changes would you do? What would your daily life look like if all of a sudden you were on staff at a church in the community and we're doing what you're doing that way?
What a fun thing to think about. So just as an example, there's a healthy United Church of Christ congregation in San Jose, and they've got great resources, wonderful space, a labyrinth outside, but pretty much everything they do is traditional. And if I could be on staff there and have the resources that they did, I would. They're literally across the street from eBay. I would find some kind of way to, either on the grounds outside so that folks could see it, some kind of way to do either a cafe outside, or some kind of way to bring music to them, maybe at the lunch hour. One of the challenges of Silicon Valley is that, like the Google campus, for example, I mean, it's like a whole world. They own you. There's a gym, there's a cafe. They want you never to leave, literally. The culture really is, work, work, work. So if I had the resources of that congregation as an example, I would go to those places, find a way, and I know some folks who work there. I'd find ways to infiltrate with love somehow, bring the church literally to them. And then the other thing is, there's a Whole Foods not far from there, and those are I keep thinking, where are the people who share these values? Try to find ways to reach out to that group. And a lot of the ideas that I'm getting in terms of starting a new congregation are things that established churches can try. For example, one thing I'm hoping to do this holiday is to go to a gas station, and convince them. I don't know, they have nothing to lose, but you buy down the price of gas, say to 99 cents, and then you hand out 99 cents a gallon, then you hand out something, have your 12 folks standing there at each pump saying, Merry Christmas from Silicon Valley United Church of Christ, your gas is 99 cents a gallon, and, whatever the limit you establish with the owner of the place, where when you reach $2,000 or something, then it's done. But I just think any way to like bring the message of radical love to where people are, and that's super exciting. Plus, if I were on staff at that congregation, I would be doing a worship service that is very different than the one they're doing. They're right across from eBay, but they're still organ. They're still, big choir. And again, I'm not anti-organ, but I think it communicates something about where a congregation is in terms of what their focus is.
Well, yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point, Nichole, and that is that in so many of our churches, I mean, when you look at the average age of at least established churches like the UCC or, even the Catholic Church, it does tend to skew older, and one reason is because people don't get their lives together until later, and that kind of thing. But you brought up the example of the companies in town, Google and some of these tech companies who literally own you in wanting to provide everything for you, so that you of course stay there, and the innovation keeps coming. But I do wonder what it would look like for you to go to one of these companies and say, look, you're trying to nurture and care for your people in every aspect of their life. Their spiritual lives is part of it, because I have read kind of some of the things that they provide, and it's usually some sort of amorphous kind of spiritual
exactly.
Space or something. And what would you do if you had to walk into eBay and kind of pitch something?
I'm not sure. I would have to do my research about the person I was going to be approaching first. But I think, the point of it is there is some awareness that people need their souls tended to. So that's the starting place. I mean, the business world gets that. There's a conference in February that I'm going to in San Francisco called Wisdom 2.0, and it's all about spirituality, but it's the business world, and there are let me tell you, Christianity is totally missing from the conversation, and so but in spite of that, there's still an acknowledgement that it makes sense to tend to the whole person. There's still that sense that people are most productive and efficient, and that's not our motivation. My motivation is to help people find wholeness that I think can only be found with a relationship with the ground of being. But even though they don't use our same language, the conversation is happening. We're just not a part of it. So I'm still searching for places like that, conversations that are happening where there is an opening and there is a hunger and there is a need. And obviously not all of those people will be into what I'm doing or talking about it in a Christian frame. But I assume some of those folks are, and in fact, they might be, waiting for that. So, my role is right now searching for those conversations that are happening, and I'm not sure what that would look like to to approach eBay, but stay tuned.
Yeah, well, you kind of allude to that famous Augustine quote, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in thee," and that there is a certain part of humanity. And you're right. There are some people who they've had bad experiences. They've reasoned that there is no God, and that if there is a God, I don't really want much to do with it. But there are those who kind of tend to adopt these ways of thinking, who maybe in their heart of hearts think, well, I still do pray once in a while, or there might be some spark that's inside of me that does need some kindling, and so.
Yes.
My heart goes out when when we hear of all these wonderful peripheral conversations on the very ground of being, to use the phrase you used. They're around that, and
yes,
and that,
absolutely.
That this is Christianity is not new. I mean, people have been trying to work their way around it for a long time, and so. If I'm hearing you correctly, you're trying to come up with a way to present these things to say, hey, wake up, there is something here.
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges, as I see it, is, okay, so I'm part of these conversations, and, even though it's all spiritual, one of the differences to me in the Christian faith is that it's not all about you. So, while our language might be similar, spiritual, and all of that stuff, to me, the next step is the cost of discipleship, which is radical generosity and living in a particular way that is oriented beyond what is best for me only. And so I think that is sort of the bind as I see it. People are open to spiritual conversation, they're open to framing things in that way, and they're hungry for it. But then the next step is, okay, so that's great. So now what? Now how do we move each other beyond talking all about growing ourselves spiritually and working toward whole lives? And then the next step is, okay, so how am I giving up a piece of what I need in order to create the kingdom? I mean, that to me is the place where I feel like is the challenge. I've seen folks are really excited about the spiritual aspect in terms of the inner journey, but that's certainly not the whole picture. So I'm curious about that step. How to then say, okay, the spiritual journey is part of what we're on together, the inward journey, but then there's also the world, and being Christ's hands in the world, and that I think is a little bit trickier. Although people really are this group is really drawn to service. Maybe the motivation for doing it is different. I'm not totally sure how that conversation will unfold.
There's a quote that comes to mind that I'm curious about your thoughts on, and it's that the purpose of life is not to live a happy life. The purpose of life is to live a life that matters. And the idea being that I am assuming where you are, people really are trying to live lives that matter.
Yes.
But I don't know. I don't live where you do, because happiness seems to be kind of the default. Well, if it makes you happy, that people go by. How does that kind of resonate to you? What comes to mind?
Well, first, the Tech Museum, the first thing that comes to mind is the Tech Museum here has this wonderful award ceremony that they do every year, and it just happened where they reward, and it's actually a cash reward too, in addition to the honoring folks who have created some kind of technology or innovation that helps the world. And so it's everything from one really wonderful one was glasses that a guy created that you could easily do without much work in a rural setting using water. So the water levels changed accordingly to adjust to the person's visual needs, and that's a really simple thing. But there are all kinds of inventions. So people really do care about making the world a better place. I mean, that really is a part of the conversation. But I might argue that the goal isn't happiness, but that when we live lives of profound meaning, happiness comes. But if we're just living to be happy, we're really missing something. And I also, would say, to me, there's a difference between joy and happiness. And so that's kind of more what I resonate with in terms of, when I feel like I'm, grounded in God and doing what I'm called to be doing, there's a contentment that comes, but that doesn't always mean that I'm happy. And, I mean, often I feel like when we are faithful to our call, often we're not happy, and it's frustrating and it's challenging, and following a call is really hard. But I think the joy is kind of more where I, feel rooted rather than happiness. That's fleeting.
And it sounds like you have one of your biggest jobs is translation.
Yes.
Is
yes.
taking these ideas of because really it's not about the practices of Christian faith that make one contented and fulfilled and even saved. It's connection with that higher being, that there is something called sin, and there is something that you can try all you can, but until you give it up and give it away, it's not going to come. And so I would imagine dealing with these kind of salvation, sin, judgment, guilt, these kind of traditional Christian terms, that there's a lot to talk about, that you've really had to translate a lot.
Yes, and it's a progressive planter dilemma. I've just had my first gathering with a group through the Beatitude Society, and so there's 8 of us altogether, the fellows this year, but there are 2 other planters. And one gentleman who might be fun for you to interview, John, he's starting a United Methodist congregation in Seattle called Valley and Mountain. And the way he says it is, for his sermons, he'll say, Nelson Mandela said this, and Gandhi said this, and then, somebody else said it too. Oh yeah, Jesus. So it's not the place that you start. It's meeting people in whatever the cultural frame that they're using, whatever that is for that community. And then it's like you slowly get to Jesus. And that's not the starting place, because people will. But if you say, it's so much of how he taught, how Jesus taught. I mean, he just said, you heard it said, but I say. So I feel like this is kind of a modern translation of that. You've heard it said by Oprah, or you've heard it said by, Martin Luther King, but, somebody else said it first. And I feel like that is so much, that's just kind of metaphor for this work in so many ways. And again, theologically, my goal is not rescuing people from the fiery pit. That's not my orientation. My orientation is saving people from shallow, hollow lives. And I believe that the gospel has something to say to that, food that is life-giving and life-saving. But, the motivation, as I mentioned before in the church planning books, it's just a totally different orientation. And there's still urgency there for me. I mean, I still feel like this community is life-saving, but in a really different theological sense.
Well, it is connecting with what's authentic with you in terms of your motivation for evangelism and for church planning and for pulling a community together. But ultimately, it's the conviction that there are a lot of people within a 3-mile radius whose lives would be better were they in community and asking together these, life's eternal questions.
Yes, absolutely.
And
as I mentioned before, one of the marks of this community is that folks are from somewhere else, and that right there. People are hungry for community, but not just any old community of shared values.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's that manifests in lots of ways, when you talk about raising children and really, trying to I often talk about my house as like an outpost for resistance of the world, like I'm, battling the pink princess craziness, and I, want my daughter to be, whoever she is and not what the culture tells her to be. And I think I see the community, that I'm hoping to create in that way too, that this is an outpost, a refuge from the values that the world tells us, that you need more stuff to be happy, and that you need more money to be happy, and that you need a bigger house to be happy. And so I feel like, what I'm hoping to create is sort of, join us, and we'll all keep each other keep each other focused on what matters, and work to draw more and to join what God is doing in the world. And, that to me is really compelling and exciting to think about.
Do you have a name for your community, Nicole?
Right now, somebody asked me, "Are you tied to the name?" The name is Silicon Valley United Church of Christ right now, and I am not tied to that. I prayed about it, but I'm just one person, and so my dream would be that the core group would shape the name, based on who they are and how this vision changes. I picked it because those who live here know that it's not really a geography, it's really a state of mind, so to speak, because some people argue that the Silicon Valley goes all the way to San Francisco, which I don't know about that, but at the very least it goes up the peninsula and includes Palo Alto and Stanford and the whole community, Mountain View where Google is, and but the name, to me, it felt like it implied forward thinking, that this is a Christian community that is a startup, so to speak, something that hasn't existed before in this way. But I'm not tied to it. I would be fine if there was something more appropriate that appeared, especially since it has, church in the name. And when I approach folks, I don't say I'm starting a church. I say I'm starting a progressive spiritual community or a progressive community of faith. I don't even use the word church.
Well, yeah, and I guess that's what was my curiosity, because, again, you think of Saddleback and some of these places that really kind of are Baptist churches, but they've just dropped all kinds of affiliation. I'm just wondering what kind of baggage that you run into.
Yeah, well, I mean, stay tuned. Again, I don't, I don't know for sure, but a name is important, but it's all, I don't think at this point it's going to hold me back, because I'm not tied to it,
Sure.
So it would be fine to change it. But I do think those who know the United Church of Christ, we're small, but we have a wonderful history of being, out there and forward and ahead of things, even, when it cost us membership, so to speak. So I'm proud of the United Church of Christ. I grew up in the UCC, and I did, one of the questions early on was, would you affiliate with anybody or multiple denominations? But I'm a UCC girl, so at this point it's in the name.
Right. And I get back to another question about digital, simply because of where you are. Do you have a website?
Yeah. www.siliconvalleyucc.org.
Yeah, and we'll make sure we get that in the post. And what goes into your whole thinking and the way that you structure that? Because I'm guessing that just because the community you're in, you have a lot of people critiquing it, and a lot of people,
I'm sure,
bringing new ideas or whatever.
Yeah, and this is another one of those places where there are a whole range of opinions about what you should do. And you can spend $5,000 on a website. You can, my thinking was I wanted something, again, that was clean, communicated my message, and was basically attractive, but nothing fancy. There's no flash. There aren't a lot of pictures, but it's 100% geared toward communicating the message and the vision. And so that, that's my focus. And like I said, I used the blog to draw people there, and it has a calendar for where to find me if you want to, if you want to check me out in terms of, office hours and that kind of stuff, or where I'm preaching and that kind of thing. So it's really, a baseline tool for me. And, and I hope that perhaps someone on the launch team or the core group will have that gift, so that can be turned over, because I cannot do it all. Definitely not.
Right. I'm wondering, with your experience where you are, and kind of having a digital home, if people want to find you, that's pretty much it. What have you learned from that, and what could existing churches do to include their web presence? I think I read the other day only half of America's churches even have a website.
Yeah, well, that's just unconscionable.
Right, especially where you are.
Again, it's like, what is your focus? If you really want to grow, you must have a website. Right. I think it's something like 90% of people will check out your website before they show up, period. It's just like any other business. Before I check out a restaurant, I go on Yelp, I look at the reviews, I read what other people are saying, and people do that with churches too. I mean, they will not show up before they, without checking out your website to see what you're about.
So, what are some of the learnings that you've come to that you might share with other congregations?
Yeah. So the other thing is that your homepage should be 100% geared toward guests, and the rest of the site should be used to communicate with folks who are already a part of things. It's really a mistake to have insider language or anything like that on the homepage. The homepage should absolutely be geared toward, folks who, aren't yet a part of things. And, simple things like I preached at a congregation on the peninsula last week, and I could not for the life of me find the worship time anywhere on the website. I mean, I know that's basic, but you'd be surprised how many congregations don't even have the worship time. That should be on the home page, somewhere easy to find. The other thing is that I see a lot of church websites that have a picture of a building, and you need to have pictures of people. People show up to see people who look something like them, who feel something like them, where they can connect, and so having a huge picture of your church on the front, it just sends the wrong message, especially if you're trying to welcome folks who have mixed experiences with churches and church buildings. You want to see people. People want to see people, that period, and then, simple navigation, easy to figure out basically kind of what you're thinking is, what do I need to know to show up on Sunday? I think it's always good to have a what to expect tab, like in terms of telling people what the dress code is, and just really, just simple stuff like what you might find on a restaurant website. On a restaurant website, you quickly want to know what the menu is and kind of the general sense of how much things cost. And what, with a church, it's, the basic stuff like, what do I need to know to not feel like an idiot when I show up on Sunday? I mean, that's basically it in terms of the website.
Sure. Well, Nichole, as our time winds down, I always like to ask, is there something that you came to the interview that you perhaps want to get across that we haven't touched upon? Is there something you want to elaborate, or some parting words you have for us before we let you go?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. This is really wonderful. Maybe just something about leadership. That was one of the questions that you posed to me, and I think it's a really wonderful topic. And I think, in terms of what will be available to folks coming out of seminary, I keep thinking about that. It seems to me that the ministries that will be available are turnarounds and church plants for the most part. I mean, there will be some exceptions to that, but the days of, having a great seminary experience and coming out as an associate and learning the trade and craft, and that's more an anomaly now. And so I'm really thinking and holding what kind of leaders and what does leadership look like in this current landscape. And one of the things that just comes to mind is perseverance and thick skin, being okay with people leaving, especially if it means you're doing something bold or taking a risk for the sake of the gospel. I think that the world needs really good leaders, and I love that you asked me that in your original framing, because it's a really wonderful conversation about what does it take to lead people in this time, and I look forward to hearing more and reading more about that, because it's really important.
Well, yeah, and that would be another hour conversation. We didn't get through half the questions that I think we thought we would, but our time is, I don't want to keep people forever. Nicole Lamarche from Silicon Valley United Church of Christ, thanks for joining me on Church Next.
Thank you so much, Chris.